Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955 in San Francisco, California, USA. Steve Jobs worked as an entrepreneur and an inventor. He was famous for co-founding Apple and creating the iPhone. Steve Jobs' biological father was a Syrian Muslim named Abdel Fattah Jindali, and his biological mother's name was Joanna Skeebel. After Steve Jobs was born, his parents gave him up for adoption. Steve Jobs lived under the care of his adopted parents, Paul and Clara Jobs. Paul was a mechanic and Clara was an accountant. During Steve Jobs' childhood, his main interests were around electronics. Him and his father would pull apart electronics in the garage and create gadgets out of the parts. When Steve Jobs was 13 years old, he made friends with 18-year-old electronic lover Steve Wozniak. He was to become his business partner after Steve Jobs and Wozniak attended Reed College in Oregon. During college, Wozniak wanted his own personal computer, so he created one himself. Jobs was impressed by this development and asked Wozniak if he wanted to join him in starting a company on creating computers. Steve Wozniak agreed, and in 1976 they formed a company named Apple and made their first computer, the Apple I. Because Steve Jobs was helping Apple a lot, Steve Jobs quit college without completing his degree. After a few years, Wozniak invented the computer Apple II, which was the first personal computer that had color. Steve Jobs convinced investors to invest in the company Apple, promising that it would become the first personal computer to be found in all homes across America, if not the world. The computer, or Apple II, was a big success, making a fortune for Apple and its investors. Steve Jobs went on a diet where he didn't eat meat except for fish. Steve Jobs believed that his diet made him not need to shower that much. He also took the drug LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, which Steve Jobs quoted was one of the 2 or 3 most important things I have done in my life. After the success of Apple II, Apple III and the Model Lisa were created and released. Although being big improvements on the Apple II in terms of ease of use and functionality, the Apple III and Lisa were not as successful as Apple II in terms of profits and sales. Steve Jobs continued on and put all his effort into developing a computer with all the functionality of previous models, but at a cheaper price so that all households could afford one. Apple released the Macintosh for the first time and increased the budget on marketing this new computer. Having a commercial appear during the Super Bowl, the first Macintosh computer was a huge success, and Apple has gone on to release numerous models where it is now known as the Apple Mac. In later years, Apple was losing money to the PC personal computer, as the PC was much cheaper than the Apple computers and could be made by multiple companies. Steve Jobs took the blame and left Apple in 1985. After Steve Jobs left Apple, he made his own company called Next Computers. Steve Jobs developed a very powerful PC, but it was too expensive for the average person to buy. Next Computers started to lose money, so Steve Jobs turned the company into a software company and he began to have some success. In 1986, Steve Jobs purchased a graphic company for $10 million and changed the name to Pixar. In 1991, Pixar received a contract from Disney to create movies. The first movie Pixar made for Disney was Toy Story, which was hugely popular and successful. Disney and Pixar went on to make more films, such as Finding Nemo, Monsters Inc., Wall-E, Cars, and Up. Steve Jobs made more money with Pixar than with Apple. Steve Jobs lived with his high school girlfriend, Kristen Brennan, and had a child with her named Lisa. Once Kristen Brennan became pregnant, Steve Jobs left Kristen Brennan and denied that he was the father of Lisa. Scientists have proved that Steve Jobs is also the father of Lisa. Steve Jobs got married to Lorraine Powell on the 18th of March 1991. Steve Jobs had 3 kids with Lorraine Powell, and the kids' names were Reed, Eve, and Aaron. Jobs, for some reason, minimized the amount of technology that his kids could use as much as possible. Once Steve Jobs died, he left behind $14.1 billion for Lorraine Powell and got some of the percentage of money that Pixar makes. Steve Jobs' death made her one of the 50 richest people on Earth. In 1997, Steve Jobs went back to Apple as the CEO. Because Apple had purchased Next Computers in 2007, Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone and later introduced the iPad and iPod. Those inventions were very famous because Steve Jobs designed the iPhone. He became more famous than Steve Wozniak. Nowadays, Apple is worth $651.5 billion, making it the most profitable brand. In 2012, Apple sold 340,000 iPhones every day. Apple also owns 300,000 USs, or $398,573.11 a minute. That's a lot of money. The brand is so famous that in Japan, someone waited 7 months in line for the iPhone 6 to be released to the public. Apple currently now has 475 stores in 7 countries. Steve Jobs sadly died from pancreatic cancer on October 5, 2011, and after fighting the cancer for several years. His last words were, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." Apple still goes on creating new technology and software for us to use.